World War II had already begun its relentless march across Europe. Poland was fighting for survival. Britain and France had declared war on Germany. But what was actually happening on the ground during those critical early days? Let me take you back to September 10th, 1939, the 10th day of the war that would reshape our world forever. While the world's attention focused on the Wehrmacht's brutal assault on Poland, something remarkable was unfolding in the Polish countryside. Thousands of civilians were transforming into guerrilla fighters overnight. Farmers who had never held a rifle were now ambushing German supply columns. Teachers were organizing resistance cells in bombed-out schools. This wasn't part of any grand military strategy. This was pure survival instinct taking hold of an entire nation. The German blitzkrieg was supposedly unstoppable, yet on this 10th day, Polish forces were mounting fierce counterattacks near the Bieszczura River. These weren't desperate last stands. These were calculated military operations that would soon develop into one of the largest counteroffensives of the entire campaign. German generals who had expected a quick victory were starting to realize that conquering Poland would cost far more blood than they had anticipated. Meanwhile, across the Channel in Britain, something equally significant was taking shape. The government was implementing rationing plans that would define British life for the next decade. Families were registering for ration books. Shopkeepers were learning new regulations. Children were being fitted for gas masks that they would carry everywhere for years to come. The British people were preparing not just for a war, but for a complete transformation of their daily existence. In France, the mood was strangely subdued. This was supposed to be the great democratic alliance standing up to fascist aggression, yet French troops sat behind the Maginot Line doing virtually nothing. Historians would later call this the phony war in the West, but there was nothing phony about the decisions being made. French commanders were already making the strategic mistakes that would lead to their catastrophic defeat less than a year later. The Soviet Union was watching everything with calculating interest. Stalin had signed his non-aggression pact with Hitler just days before the invasion. Now Soviet diplomats were quietly coordinating with their German counterparts about how to divide Poland between them. The world didn't know it yet, but in just 7 days, Soviet forces would invade Poland from the east, sealing that nation's fate. Back in Poland, the civilian cost was mounting horrifically. German forces weren't just fighting the Polish military, they were systematically terrorizing the population. Villages were being burned. Civilians were being executed for the slightest resistance. The Luftwaffe was bombing cities with no military value whatsoever. These weren't accidents of war. This was deliberate policy, a preview of the total war that would consume Europe. The Polish government was already preparing for the worst. Secret orders were going out to preserve vital documents and cultural treasures. Plans were being made for a government in exile. Polish gold reserves were being quietly moved to safety. Even as they fought desperately to save their country, Polish leaders understood they might soon be fighting from foreign soil. In neutral countries, the implications were becoming clear. Diplomats in Washington, Rome, and Tokyo were reassessing everything. Would this war spread? Could anyone stay neutral? American public opinion remained firmly isolationist, but President Roosevelt was already maneuvering behind the scenes, trying to find ways to support the Allies without dragging America into another European war. Naval warfare was beginning to heat up. German U-boats were prowling the Atlantic, hunting for British merchant ships. The Battle of the Atlantic, which would become the longest continuous military campaign of the entire war, was in its infancy. British sailors were learning harsh lessons about convoy tactics and submarine warfare. Every ship that went down was a small tragedy, but also a lesson that might save dozens of vessels later. By day 10, certain patterns were already emerging that would define the entire war. the speed and brutality of German military tactics, the resilience of people under occupation. The complex web of alliances and betrayals, the mixture of careful planning and complete chaos. Nobody standing in the rubble of Polish cities on September 10th could have imagined that this war would last 6 years and claim over 60 million lives. But the seeds of that catastrophe were already planted and growing in the ruins.